What if everything you've been told about morality is actually destroying the very foundations it claims to uphold? The truth is, we're witnessing the final chapter of one of the most fascinating intellectual showdowns of our time, with Jordan Peterson standing as the guardian of eternal truths, while Pope Francis, who just passed away, leaves behind a church forever changed by his attempts to navigate between tradition and a relativistic world. And caught in the middle, your soul and everything that once felt certain. Think about it. When was the last time you felt absolutely certain about what's right and wrong? That clarity your grandparents seemed to have, where did it go? The moral confusion you feel isn't random, it's engineered, and in this video we're pulling back the curtain on who's responsible, examining a debate frozen in time by Francis's unexpected departure from the world stage. The clash between Peterson and Pope Francis wasn't just about religious doctrine. It was about whether truth itself can change, based on cultural whims. One man believes we've abandoned the foundations that built Western civilization. The other believed those foundations must bend or break. Their intellectual standoff represents the exact tension, tearing at your life right now, whether you realize it or not. When Jordan Peterson speaks about tradition and eternal values, he's not just being stubborn or nostalgic. He's pointing to something profound that our hyper-progressive culture desperately wants to ignore. That humans need solid ground to stand on. We need meaning that transcends our momentary feelings. We need truth that doesn't shift with the political winds. The idea that moral values are merely social constructs that can be redesigned at will, Peterson argues, is perhaps the most dangerous delusion of our time. Now contrast this with Pope Francis, whose death marks the end of a papacy that honestly shocked traditionalists by suggesting that the church must evolve on issues, from divorce to homosexuality. "Who am I to judge?" became his famous refrain. Words that thrilled progressives and, horrified conservatives in equal measure. But here's what's fascinating. Pope Francis wasn't abandoning moral principles, he was attempting to reframe them through what he called the hierarchy of truths. Some doctrines he suggested matter more than others. The timing of his passing creates a vacuum where these questions hang unresolved, waiting for his successor to either continue his path of cautious evolution or return to more traditional interpretations. It's history holding its breath. But Peterson would likely counter with a sobering question: if eternal truths can change, were they ever eternal to begin with? And once you start deciding which divine commands are negotiable, where exactly do you stop? The bitter irony? Both men believed they were saving the church. Peterson, by calling it back to its foundations. Pope Francis, by helping it adapt to survive. Both believed they were protecting human dignity. Both believed they were serving truth. But their visions of truth couldn't be more different. Jordan Peterson, with his maps of meaning and clinical precision, sees relativism as the ultimate betrayal of what makes us human. He witnesses patients crushed under the weight of nihilism, lives without foundation, minds without moorings. For him, when religious institutions abandon their commitment to unchanging truth, they're not just changing policy, they're committing theological malpractice. For him, the essence of Christianity wasn't rigid adherence to every historical position, but rather capturing the spirit of compassion behind them. Mercy trumped doctrine in the Pope Francis framework. A mission now suddenly interrupted, leaving the world to wonder. Was his approach a temporary deviation, or the beginning of a permanent shift? But here's where it gets complicated. What happens when mercy toward one group means abandoning principles that another group considers sacred? When Pope Francis signaled openness to communion for the divorced, or greater acceptance of LGBT individuals, traditionalists didn't just see policy changes, they saw the collapse of a coherent moral universe. Think about your own life for a moment. Where do you draw your moral lines? Are they based on deep, unchanging principles, or do they shift with whatever your social circle currently approves? Be honest with yourself. Most of us haven't really thought this through. We're just absorbing whatever moral framework gets us accepted by the people around us. It's almost darkly comical. We worry about the food we put in our bodies more than the moral frameworks we put in our minds. We'll spend hours researching clean eating, but accept moral principles, without even questioning where they came from, or where they might lead. This isn't just philosophical masturbation. Seriously, this tension shapes everything. From how you raise your children to how civilizations rise or fall. History shows that societies without moral consensus don't just disagree, they disintegrate. The Roman Empire didn't just have economic problems, it suffered a catastrophic loss of shared values. Sound uncomfortably familiar? Peterson would argue that Pope Francis, despite his compassionate intentions, participated in precisely this kind of civilizational deconstruction. By suggesting that doctrines can evolve with the times, Pope Francis inadvertently fed the beast of moral relativism that's devouring Western civilization from within. His death doesn't end this debate. It escalates it, as the Church must now decide whether to continue or reverse course. The great psychologist would likely point out that throughout history, when religious institutions compromise their core truths to accommodate cultural pressures, they don't strengthen, they weaken, and eventually collapse. Why? Because if yesterday's eternal truth can become today's outdated thinking, why believe anything at all? People aren't stupid. They recognize inconsistency, and they respond with cynicism. But Pope Francis's supporters would counter that this misses a profound truth about religious tradition. It has always evolved. The Church of 500 AD wasn't identical to the Church of 1500 AD, which wasn't identical to today's. What appears as compromise to Peterson might actually be the living, breathing nature of tradition itself. Pope Francis's death, they might suggest, doesn't invalidate his vision, it makes it more urgent. Here's a thought experiment that might clarify where you stand. Imagine two religious leaders. One says, these moral principles have remained unchanged for thousands of years because they reflect eternal truth. The other says, while our core values remain, our understanding of how to apply them must evolve with human knowledge and social conditions. Which approach instinctively feels right to you? Which one scares you a little? That fear might be worth examining. The truth is, both extremes carry dangers. Absolute moral rigidity can crush human complexity and lead to cruelty. Complete moral fluidity can dissolve meaning and lead to nihilism. Most of us sense this intuitively, which is why we're drawn to aspects of both, Jordan Peterson's stability and Pope Francis's compassion. So where does this leave you? Trapped between rigid tradition and shapeless progress? Not necessarily. There's a third way that combines Peterson's commitment to foundational truth with Pope Francis's emphasis on compassionate application. It starts with recognizing that principles can be eternal while their expressions evolve. Consider this practical framework. First, identify your non-negotiable moral foundations. The principles so fundamental that abandoning them would mean abandoning yourself. For many, these include basic concepts like human dignity, truth-telling, and justice. Second, distinguish between principles and their applications across different contexts. Third, be willing to update your understanding without abandoning your foundations. Peterson himself honestly demonstrates this balance better than his critics admit. He's absolutely committed to truth, but also, remarkably practical in discussing how eternal principles manifest in complex human situations. His famous phrase, "Tell the truth, or at least don't lie," captures this perfectly. It's an absolute principle, truthfulness, paired with some real practical wisdom about human limitation. What would a conversation between Peterson and Pope Francis have looked like in their final opportunity? Probably, it would have been less like the Twitter-fueled cage match we might imagine, and more like two men discovering surprising common ground beneath their differences. Both believe in transcendent meaning. Both see the human person as sacred. Both recognize that nihilism destroys the human spirit. That conversation, though, will now remain one of history's great what-ifs. Their core disagreement wasn't actually about whether truth exists, but about how unchanging truth relates to changing human understanding. And that's a question worth wrestling with in your own life, especially as we witness this pivotal moment in religious history. The next time you feel that internal tension between holding firm and showing mercy, between maintaining standards and extending grace, you're experiencing the Peterson-Francis divide within yourself. And that's not a problem to solve, but a paradox to live with wisdom. The greatest minds throughout history have recognized that moral truth isn't a simple formula but a living reality that requires both conviction and compassion. As G.K. Chesterton put it, the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting, it has been found difficult and left untried. So where do we land? Perhaps with a synthesis that might have satisfied both Peterson and Francis. Principles don't change, but our understanding deepens. Moral truth isn't relative, but our applications must be contextual. Tradition matters precisely because it carries wisdom beyond any individual's limited perspective. This isn't a comfortable middle ground, It's the demanding narrow path between rigidity and dissolution. It requires constantly asking, am I compromising truth to fit in, or am I using truth as a weapon to avoid growth? The ultimate question isn't whether you side with Peterson's psychological traditionalism or Francis's progressive Catholicism. It's whether you're willing to do the difficult work of living with moral seriousness in a world obsessed with moral convenience. Because here's what both Peterson and Francis would likely agree on. A life without moral foundations isn't freedom, it's actually the most subtle form of imprisonment. And, societies that abandon a shared moral vision don't progress, they disintegrate. If this video has stirred something in you, that sense that maybe you've been drifting morally without even realizing it, then perhaps it's time to rebuild your ethical foundations with both conviction and compassion. Not because, an algorithm told you to, but because something deep within you recognizes that how we determine right and wrong really matters more than almost anything else. With Pope Francis now gone and his legacy kind of hanging in the balance, we're witnessing history's pendulum swing in real time. The question isn't just who will lead the church next, but which vision of truth will guide us forward. The unchanging foundation or the evolving application? Perhaps honestly, the wisest path embraces both. If you found this exploration valuable, there's more where this came from. Subscribe to the Behavior Algorithm channel for videos that don't just inform you, but really transform how you see yourself and the world around you. Because in a culture that's, drowning in information but starving for wisdom, these are the discussions that actually matter.